然后这么念下写的这么念下写的，那明白的那旅当错啊当sem当确实不刚入起来米呢，那让给成绩当记成绩写的，这这把那写的给结巴结呢，那这把那写的给对比个咱们去看把写的了。这么念下来是这么念下我的些，这么念下明白的了，旅当错话的sem确实是的，但谢谢，当然这个旅的些，但错话的，错话人明白的呢，错话我的个人是，让个我个人写的，让给成意，但是错话让给成意的个人了呢，那错话写的，电话当动啊，当然看样说鸟语个写吧，点那个这都当年说还要用为我就别个写不起来，那这个作为我的那些用啊些的那些，的作为我就让给成绩的些，他既成绩些的，那错的点都，那没得话结巴去没得话讲呀，的那动啊什么当讲呀，的那第一点都，那大学生就这边动吧的结巴就讲呀，第一点都，那干啥啦？有这边这边动啊。的大面把的结巴就公面，的几层结巴让些层一旦大了公把结巴些的，我都是觉得是那的这个写词儿吧啦。今天大学生这个动画写的是吧？大面把的干啥让有这边这边动画写的是吧？
Good afternoon. This morning then we continue to look at the 4 close placements of mindfulness, and amongst the 4 observed objects we've looked at the first 2, that of body and feelings. For a close placement of mindfulness by now hopefully is clear that from its entity it's an exalted wisdom engaged in practicing a path included in mindfulness and wisdom, having investigated the general and specific characteristics of any of the 4 body, feelings, mind and phenomena. So with each of the observed objects, then one investigates with mindfulness holding the object and wisdom investigating first the object's specific characteristic and thereafter its 4 general characteristics. General, and that is those characteristics are general to all 4 observed objects. Specific characteristic because it's specific to just that one characteristic, and that specific characteristic is the entity of the observed object. This morning we looked at feelings in particular, and the entity of feelings is experience. So as we see on the top of page 4, with respect to feeling, the entity of experience. And we saw that feeling can be divided in a number of different ways. And the way here in our particular text is that into feelings of happiness, feelings of suffering, and neutral feelings, or to translate it differently, pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, and neutral feelings. And thereafter, we looked at, having looked at then the specific characteristic, we spoke about the 4 general characteristics that one investigates feelings through. And first was impermanence, second was in the nature of suffering, and third was empty, seeing that the feelings are empty of being permanent, unitary, and independent. And fourthly, selfless, in that they are not utilized by a self that is self-sufficient, substantially existent.
남당 망보 예배나네 당아줄 초와세데 간스리도 세비기 소소기 초와디 안에 제바체 삼다야다 안 초와데 모여송야지 초왕어송도 셰베네나 베유지라 미비기네 나가서 메도지라 따디베갑리나 다델라 셰바 망보 예배나네 안에 초와데 간리에스네 메도지라 따네 델리아 안나가서 메도디 지부주나 네 야구도 셈비기 지지게 대랑라 뭐 예득행기 안에 셰바텔라 초와 세시라 고래세 먼저 두 초와 삼다 제가 먼저 초와들라 삼다이다 Sowa dila, sowa diya kichi chibi, mitabares kichi gyuru, mitabares ada. Andu samdaya che. Dine samdaya, sowa dila dine gali gore, sine nga zule, sowa dewa chili nga zule, chakwa khariki osu, sowa dewa la chabe, chakwa ki gore. Chisan sowa dewa la chebe, chakwa ki che, chakwa digi wangi, nga zuge, chige, xena nubige, le, simche soche bala soba, da xena nubige, le, jawa mungo cheyendu, dera dine le nga basaya dang. Ane, chige, sowa dunga midyo baki, sowa dunga di midyo baki, sowa dunga dine jawa dubi, samba kigorwa, midyo baki yodu. Ane, sowa dunga di midyo baki zang, sowa dima dunga di yongsare samche ngongo go chedo, xena ya nubaki ya dang. Ane, xena ya kanga, chige, simche soche che ya dang. Didu le nga ba, diba dine se le nga ba mangbo sa. Dine le nga ba sa ba, dela dine, nyomo ba kine, dea shata hondro la so ba kiyandu, dela dine, nga zi le nga ba sa. Le di ongi, nga zi ya, kowa le kiawa le che. Che zang nga zuge, dine pungpo di kiawa le, dine pungpo di dunga yu dunga da, nyu yu dunga da, kiawa duji yu dunga, cha sangi ne, ngo dibi pungpo di, dine kowa le kiawa le ngo res. Che zang dine yin zang, nga zuge chowa, dedula dine, nyomomba dine le sa, le yi ongo kowa kiwa lingido. Chesa dine eza, ta nga zu kyo chowa deduk digi, ane kari resane, nga zu kyo chowa dewa diya, ta tingi dewa dine mare, chesa dele dine nga zu kyo kunjung tenpiki nisu da hagu kore, dele ta le da, nyomomba ta le da, kiyondo di ongo kowa la kiwa gyusi hagu kore, kunju deba hagu kore. Chesa dine eza, ta nga zu le kari pangu kore, sene, kowa la kiwa limbi, gyu le da, nyomomba pangu kore, pangpa eza, chowa didu kanis keba na dela kibiki chakwa makiya da ane ko chowa dunga kidu dela jadu ki seba makiya di ane nga so peche chekwa di kiye chimba chakwa re.
This morning then we looked at primarily the close placement of mindfulness on feelings. Feelings then, the mental factor of feeling accompanies each and every consciousness. So therefore, this is a mind, a consciousness we need to come to recognize, because it is omnipresent and plays, and not only is it omnipresent, but it plays a crucial role in our ongoing suffering in samsara. So we need to investigate the entity of our feelings, see how they arise and how we experience them. So come to see them in their full range, come to see feelings in their full range of variety. So as always, take an easy example, take a flower. So a differing mental factor will take that flower as beautiful, and at the same time as that, a feeling arises. And considering this or conceiving this flower to be beautiful, that feeling that arises together with this labeling is a pleasant feeling. So that's very simple to understand. We take that understanding and we need to apply it on far subtler levels too, in that feelings accompany every consciousness. Then in terms of the four general characteristics, the first was impermanent. So there we see that feelings change momentarily. They're not stable, they're not reliable, and they're certainly not worthy of craving for, hoping that they will last, give us lasting happiness. The second characteristic was that of being in the nature of suffering. So here we looked at a few ways. There are a few ways that one approaches this in terms of the causes, but one also sees that from feeling, the arisal of a pleasant feeling, attachment immediately comes. And from this attachment now, grasping at this pleasant feeling, wanting it to continue, we engage in a number of activities. And those often will bring harm to others. And thereby, we accumulate non-virtuous karma. Similarly, with unpleasant feelings, with that, immediately aversion follows. And under the influence of aversion, we bring harm to others and thereby accumulate further non-virtuous karma. So here we see this process that whether a pleasant or unpleasant feeling arises, afflictions follow. And from those afflictions, we so often engage in harmful activities, accumulating negative karma. So from these two feelings then, we continue to create the causes for suffering and cyclic existence. We continue to create the causes that ensures this wheel of suffering of samsara continues to turn unabated. This we need to come to recognize for ourselves. This process of the suffering of samsara is entwined with the arisal and grasping at pleasant and unpleasant feelings. We need to come to realize this clearly for ourselves, come to see we need to, utilizing mindfulness and wisdom, be constantly aware of this process in which feelings give rise to conflict, discontent within us. And thereby, we can start to interrupt this chain, primarily by thinking that in this way that we will be able to affect and change our conception of feelings, that there was something to be enjoyed or to be grasped at, and rather we should value them less and rather put our attention on lasting, stable happiness, not be confused and distracted by temporary pleasures or temporary unpleasant feelings, but rather strive for lasting, stable happiness.
namda mangboshi ligoro, chowa ligoro, dushe yu ligoro, sem ligoro, yila cheba sa de sem jung, mangboshi ligoro. Dini yenzada, ngazo sem sayadi, gana sayadi, sem, shi sem la mine, ta rangi tsengi da ji tsengi yin da na gomba gongorwa, ta de gomgo da sem ki rangi tsengi de ka re sayade, tangbo di sam tangorwa dangzo.
Let's then move to the third observed object, that of mind. Yeah, then this is the close placement of mindfulness on the mind, and the way to perform this meditation is in the same sequence as before. If we start by taking to mind the same illustration as before, when one sees a flower, then there are a variety of consciousnesses arising, a variety of mental factors accompanying a main mind, mental factors such as feelings, discrimination, contact, engagement, intention, and many others that will engage this object and accompany a mind.
Sem said, and then answer Sheba Mangbu, you've been Sim said, the Kanisha, Korongo, Kanisha, Sheba Chedu, then answer you de la Tong and Ducabla, you de la Ngo dan Chebare Ni Nane, the Ngo Zam Mipigit, the Ngo Zam Mitikin Shebachilla, Sem Sir. You all pen meadow, the meadow Horanche, meadow de Lian Cheba Gabo dan, Sixia la Sobada, then the Delia Loma dan, then the Denigi Chebar Murwa, the Denigi Chebar Kaya, some Mata, Chebar de la Matavache, so and more than Chebar in the meadow, more some Zindugi, more some. More than Cabani and so all a mini Mitikingi, Shebatella, and the Semla God, that's same young was at Tinish.
There are many types of consciousness, but here we're talking about a primary consciousness or main mind, and its role is just to observe the entity of the object. This word observe shows how it engages object. Just observes it. And what does it observe of the object? Its entity. So what does that mean? it doesn't observe the variety of characteristics of the object, just its entity. So if it's a flower, all that it observes is the entity of the flower. It doesn't observe the characteristics such as its color, that it has leaves, and so forth. Mind, primary consciousness, just observes the entity of the object.
이나 두가게 메도라 따와 찍버레데 이나 디나네 혼조게 믹스이 혼조 내가 같이 자고로와 지사 대신에 쉐바나지 두가게 메도 통화에다 찍버 통화 임발라 초와디 가르쳐서선 조 그런게 메도들 따지니 대랑라 대용오 기되게 쉐바들라 그런게 초 냠sun용 와시데 지사 초와시는 그런게 메도 통고할 때 그런게 내가 조 캐버 델이야 가위게 유 대외에 된나 받을 미제 대용오 개발세 초와시고로 두시에서야지 가르서는 그런 메도를 통고할 때 디 메도 까버리샤 디 충충을해샤 디 첨보르샤 디 메도가 로마르샤 디 이제서 하고 간딜라 두시에서 그런 개발을 딜미고 개발을 미도 진짜 나도 셈세야지 되니기 유 개발 가 삼바도 유sem 오 메도랑 미디겐기 데라 아니 셈세고로다 제가 되는 인자 차상기 유 메도를 미바이 마치발라 그런 내가 같이 여봐시 조 조에 내가 여봐시 대체 셈 그런 거 내가 조에 가르서네 캬반 당원 다 캬바 유용오 메도 뭐다 캬반이 있는 뭐라 조 미디겐 따디비 로텔라 다 셈세야지 디날 베지나라 디자도 셈라 미치 용어라도 셈라 미치 용어스디 셈세디 공유 용어점라 아니 미 뭐라 뭐의 개변이 있는 뭐라 좀 미비게 아니 되니기 미디게 뭐르기비 셰바텔라 아니 셈라고 그래지로와 다 셈용 뭐어야 돼 랑게 칭이스나디 랑게 칭이람다 셈고로 뭐 되니지 셈라고 그래지
When an object is observed, we can say there are 6 consciousnesses that apprehend the object. There will be those 5 omnipresent mental factors, as well as a main mind, a primary consciousness. And they will apprehend the object. All of them have their own respective functions. They fulfill different roles. So we have omnipresent mental factors, such as feeling, which we spoke about this morning, and then there's also discrimination, and there's intention, and there's contact, and there's mental engagement, and then there's mind or primary consciousness. So feeling, as we know, is what experiences the object. So if it's the flower, it will have a experience. There'll be a pleasant experience or an unpleasant experience in relation to the flower. The consciousness of discrimination, this will differentiate in terms of this flower is white in color. This is the stem, these are the leaves, etc. So differentiate between the varying aspects. And then the other omnipresent mental factors fulfill their own specific functions. And in addition to those omnipresent ones, there may well be others too, all fulfilling specific functions. Then the function of mind is, or primary consciousness, is merely or only to observe the entity of the object. And this we see here near the top of page 4, with the specific characteristic of the observed object of mind is the entity of observation, number 3. So the entity of mind is to observe the object, that's all. So you can say that this is the definition of mind. It observes.
Ange sema samgudu simada jikti khabarska chigo marangis nge sem sedu tanga joy sem se jibu lapsha gorwa jidan tanga jo dinare yawara cheba ina a jo gar chigo rasene Gyältsen niche semna semjung sen Gyältsen niche or semna semjung. Da semna semjung Gyältsen niche de kan chi ko sne jidang nga ju yu de la yu ko rong ngo jidang kebar ni yung ko wa yu de la ngo dang ko rong ge kebar ni yung ko re. 제가 ngo da kebar ni ge ne zo ngo zam tong de ngo le mi ne zo kebar de tong de nang ne tong ko de na zo ngo la da de gen gi sheba de la sem sa chi kebar shi ko re. 다 ngoda kebrani nane ngo 통고할 때 ngoda kebrani 조 kebradiля kebra돌야 다디경이 셰바들라 셈중세지 라고래 나 데니게 대체당아 주 셰바들라 셈나 셈중세 야와 니체호데 제가 셈나 셈중이게 kebrade 가르스나 유용ngoda kebrani 조 ngola 다디경이 셰바들라 셈중 셈세 유기용어다 개발이기는 조 개발될 다되긴 다되긴 셔바들 셈중세네 당아 저기 다리가 지 80초 예와제도 제바제도 셈나 셈중 개발 예와체 차고라 지난한 넘준 지된 배경아 저 되는 흉달 대기시마셔바네 셈세데 셈세데 셈직마다 개발 강한 지고 말아 저서 차상 셈납셔고로 초와기 엉이 셈레데 초와기도 엉이 셈레데 쟁기도사다 나 초고도 생용도사다 네 dinner tengidos me samna 가르스면 디 충충을 해서 디 체저를 해서 디 삼관의 두시래와 셈주래요 이제 셈문에 말해 다지나 안쪽이 지딘백이 중국고 빼지고 기치만 지딘백 하게 날아야 차상이야 셈셈ing 다용 걸 랍셔거와.
For those who have been attending the previous weekend classes that we started last year and have done this year too on awareness and knowers, then what I'm going to say now will make a lot of sense to you. But for those for whom this is new, then here there is a challenge with how we utilize language. Because in our everyday life in the world, the way we talk about mind or consciousness is not at all specific. So we'll talk about my mind. I am feeling happy. I think this is big. I think that is small. I think this about whatever it is. And this is how we refer to our mind in a very general way. And there's no mistake with that. But here, the language you utilize is quite precise and has differing meanings. And again, those who've been coming to the teachings on awareness and knowers, this will be very clear to you. But and for those who have been coming, you'll know there are many different ways that awareness can be divided, or consciousness can be divided. So the way that I'll present here is into main mind and mental factors, or mind and mental factors. So what we have here as the observed object of mind has as a synonym main mind or primary consciousness. That's one division. The second division is mental factors, and there are many. So objects too can be divided in different ways. So we can say an object has its entity or its essence, as well as its characteristics. So we can divide consciousness into main mind and mental factors, object into its entity and characteristics. Now how these relate, because mind or consciousness always has an object. The main mind or primary consciousness, its function is to merely observe the entity of the object. That's it. Whatever the object's entity is, mind observes it. Then all the mental factors that accompany this mind, they engage with the various characteristics of the object. So for example, the feeling that arises within oneself in relation to the object, that is, as we've heard, that's a mental factor. It's a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling or a neutral feeling. There's a differing mental factor, discrimination, which states that this object is small or it's big or it's the color white or whatever, or that it is a flower. And then there are a wide number of other or many other mental factors engaging with varying differing aspects of that object. So that's, but the mind, in this way of understanding this, the mind, its function is to observe the entity of the object. And that's what what we are referring to when we refer to mind here, as we see by point 3, with respect to the mind, it means main mind or primary consciousness, and its function, its entity, is observation. It observes the entity of the object.
메도들에 닝지베 차요를 양 가실에 제 닝셔 메베 차요를 가시 바마로 차용구로와 진짜 소와 대화기야도 메도들에 미네 소와 대화기야도 소와디 가를 미고스네 메도들에 미제 메도게 렉베 차딜라 조델이야 따지고래다 다 메도들 이제 소와 마디와 기와이나 진짜 닝주 미드스베 마가와르 남나 기그로와 소와 마디와 기야도 진짜 메도들라 말렉 배차지요래. 지선 소와디기 말렉 배차들 소와다디고. 말렉 배차 야구 매바 차지요래 봐. 지선 야구 매 말렉 배차들 따지네. 따된 소와 동아기. 다 레베 차단 고 땅님 레베 차나 이 직바로 진나 고 소와디 발만 땅님으로 지기 고 발미게 차들 따야도 아니 고 소와 땅님 실리고 마도 대화다 동아 가리고 말. 지선 소와 대화기에도 유기 레베 차들 다는 대화게 유기 또 밀레베 차들 삼다도 소와들 동하게 동하게다 유기는 레바다 밀레바 가면 땅님게 차들 소와디 땅여도 소와들 땅님게 영화식 하고 그래서 소와디 유기들 뒤지고 다 두시에서야디 가르치고로서는 디레샤 디가보레샤 디치제 디디레 디디마레서 야와체야디 그 첨번은 최초에는 디 첨보래샤, 디 춘춘래샤, 안디 까보래샤, 디 낙보래샤, 디 거의 예와체 디디레스 봐, 직파 직 참아지긴디 두시디기 지용으로 와. 그러면 아주 대시 잠반 이제 시행도 잠바세야 되게 셈조래, 셰랍세야 되게 셈조로 와. 잠바디에 가르치고 그래서는 유들라 배미치는 그런 걸 가르쳐서는 파 마제바제 진도 마제바제 파 마제바제 진도 견딜래. 치고래. 다 셰랍 코로나 가르치고서는 데니기 잼바디 마제 진도바들라 셰랍디 양 디제나 가려온 거 디가 차그래 디제나 가려온 것은 그 제바체게 남바로 차르고. 그래서 그런 자산 레가하로지 차디고 와. 유디 마제바제 진도인데 마제바제 바 진도인데 잼바세고 와.
When consciousness is divided into two, with mind and then mental factors, then it's mental factors that engage with the characteristics of the object, and mind only observes the entity of the object. So let's look a little bit then at the role of mental factors. So there are many, and those, and they tend to operate together simultaneously. So feeling, we've heard about a lot already. So feeling is the entity of experience, or feeling has the entity of experience. So it's how the object is experienced. Perhaps, so if the object is apprehended as, let's say this flower, as beautiful, a pleasant feeling will experience the object. If the flower is believed to be quite ugly, then the feeling will be unpleasant. Or it will be a happy feeling or suffering feeling, just different translations. And if the flower is seen as being nothing special, a neutral feeling will arise. So that's the function of the mental factor of feeling. Another mental factor, that of discrimination or differentiation. It engages with the object and differentiates between this and that, various differing characteristics of the object. For example, this flower is black, it's not white. Well, that's unlikely. This flower is white and not black. This flower is small, not big. This is the leaf, this is the stem, etc. So this is the function of discrimination. So we see feeling has its specific function. The mental factor discrimination, its specific function. as is the case with all the mental factors. For example, mindfulness is a mental factor. Its function is to hold the object, prevent one from losing the object, hold the object. Wisdom is also a mental factor. And wisdom investigates the object, investigates, is it like this, is it like that, what's the cause, why is it like this, etc. So we've heard that the close placement of mindfulness is done with mindfulness and wisdom. We saw that in the definition, in the entity of the close placement of mindfulness. So we see here mindfulness and wisdom are both mental factors, and we've also now seen all mental factors have their own specific function with how they engage the object.
Sem Sadi, Jibumato Shiomadi, Dinade Semna, Semjus Yawa Ichetini, Chikore, Tenesiasa, the Sem Sadi, and the Ganachil Lauri, Laudana, to Sem Seconds to Cheba Chesia, the Rangit Seni, Sem Koron, was a Ganish to Ganichileda, Sheben Namda, the Nemabu Benana, and Sem said the Ganichil Sungutus, Pa Cheba Chedu, Cheba Chedu, and Chedu, Ya Yu more than Kevan and more than me so, all I meet you can give. And Shebatilla, the same city, same Shas, and that is all the same Shevan, it's all the same, it's all the share. Shandadi, you chorus or same joint, you same you chorus. The same Horongosam, Zindiche, the Shandadi, Lerle, and the same duty, Lerle, or what's the same Horon, Zores, she's not so same, it is not the Nigich, same you what in the such Chebachadi, Duchen, same you what you was on your do, then Rangi, same Rangi. Rangi Mo, Rangi Tsin, Jebache, Rangi Tsin, Jebache, Jamba, Jambi, Tsin, Della Sherapki, Ganichu, the Tika Resha, Dine, Semia Ganachasa, Jebachine, and Sherapki Jebachine, Semio Mo, how you do, Dine, the Semla Mini, Rangi Mo, Rangi Tsin, the Chitsin, and Rangi Tsin, Jebache, the Komna de Shigorwa.
To summarize then, in our everyday lives, when we talk about mind, we do so in a very general way. And that's also how we tend to utilize it here as well, just talking about mind in a general way. But here, right now, in this context, it has a specific meaning. And that is, mind only observes the entity of its object. It does not engage with the characteristics of the object. That is done by mental factors, such as mindfulness and wisdom. Mindfulness which holds the object. Wisdom, and holds it in a way so that there isn't distraction, the mind doesn't move away from the object. Wisdom investigates the object in detail. Mind merely observes the entity of the object. So that's the way that we should understand mind here. In this context, in the context of the close placement of mindfulness on the observed object of mind.
Any rangi tsingi semdi, that ending more than Caberni and all at all meet against Sheba the Semresha, and all dinner how go do that Digalia, that the nigger semdi, Jambigi Zinche, Chema Jobacha Tempi Zinche, that Digalia Chitini, Mitabada. This way, Jabachi, Comoro, Jebacha, just not the same young order, la Miche, Tempe, Zinche, Chema, Zinche, Zinche Bangane, then Shebaki, Sherapkida, Jiting, Sherap said the same Sadi, that Denina, and Kokichi, Chiba, Kazini, Kuganis, Karelet in the Yungudu, and the Kazini to Kichi Chiba, Chigidu, Chigumindu, Shebachedu, and that was Jebache, the Mitaba Rangi, Chi, Mitaba, the Jebachigorua, Bene, the same Jebachevan, same day, the Netzi, Jetidu, the she, sugar some die, same day, that do a Midus Jebachedu, sugar some die, the mare, that the mare. The Chisan that some died, sugar something in the carja. And do change the Andiginiel Kama, Chuzi some that do as and the Amica, Samidu. The Nedicama chicken yellow do as in the Amida Casa, Mindu. She's not that in Nerab Semdi, and the Gyälwa karma chigi Gyälwa yorbesan diameter ko korong 균치마 sem shanda 균치마 기그리마 또 다디 내가 지 셰바디 sem koran 지루도아 sem 된 제가 되네 인자 sem koran 끼지 지비기 오지 레샤 sem비기 되니 제바지네 하고 해도 sem이 돼도 안에 랑이 지천이 미다바 제바제 겁나시거와.
Hopefully then it's clear the difference in function between that of the mind and mental factors. That mind has the function of knowing or observing the object. Mind has the function of observing the entity of the object, and its mental factors that engage with the varying characteristics. Mindfulness, for example, holds object. Wisdom investigates the object. So here, and the third close placement, that's of the close placement of mindfulness on the body. We first look at on the mind. We first look at the specific characteristic of the mind, which is its entity is observation. Thereafter, we move to investigate the four general characteristics of mind, namely impermanent, suffering, empty, and selfless. So impermanent then. So here we investigate whether mind is permanent or impermanent. Whether it's changing momentarily or not changing momentarily. And either mind, if it were permanent, it wouldn't change momentarily. Every moment would be the same. But mind, of course, does change momentarily. In that our mind of today is not the same mind as yesterday. It's not the same mind as in this morning's session. It's not even the same mind as a minute ago. There is a continuity, but it's not the same mind. It changes momentarily. And that's just to say, as a translator, what I mean by it's not the same mind, it's not something that's unchanging. Rather, it's changing momentarily.
That's semye, Gyälwa, that's semye tendo, that dunga demba, ane kasore, sometimes dungawa says sometimes jiware, that's sem ngang zuki, sosuki ngang zuki sem tela samdang urwa, chisang ngang zuki sem di, da ane, garili ne du she, se du, ngang zuki garis yungudu se du, da, sem tela, ane, galliyo se ne, sem tela, ane di kordo juwe chowa tela, sem de kordo juwe chowa tela, chowa dunga geyo bada, ane dewa gewa dunga gewa, tayum geyo, giyo urwa, chisang, da chowa dunga di, dunga geyo du, ane sem diya, sem de, denigi sem de da, gawane gigore se du, koronge da nga zu ya, gyuliya samdangoro gyugarili gigore se du, da nga zu gyudi, sem di, 게 되라 되지 소화셔바나신 게 되라 유지라 미네 게고 유지고라 미네 게고래 진짜 유지미네 유디 여바증에 기가 말디 유 그런 규인가마 치마지 규인가마마 고고래 진짜 규긴 망보실라 손에 게고고라 게반자다 나주기 셈디게 조 유디가선 나주기 동아이 풍부에 최대라 미디가서 자고라 당아서 디체 안다 데니기 당아 셈이 조 그디 나가나 소소랑 삼다디 지당 셈나라 가브리엘야 칠로 ngo바다디나 삼당에서 망저 조로 등아주기 랑 삼다디 거로 랑이야 삼대 진짜 데니자 셈디 유잉아마 간스키기도 세네 다 유잉아마 아니 도야야 데디잉아는 깨와 아미기 셈기 균질에 되는 깨요 데니기 깨야디야 마 깨어도 안 될이야 아주기 아주 키싱 류리야 매응알이 인삼 제외 갑라 데니 풍부 날이야 셈 주바디 그래서네 레다 뇽모베 니 레기 온기 델 슈고레세 데네 슈바인자 디 레다 뇽모 온기 되게 제발 제사 셈디 레다 뇽모 온기 제발이셔 제사 레다 뇽모 제발인자 다 동아기 라시리 에사지 제사 심포라 라마메 되겐 가브리엘라 기고야 가브리엘라 두아요야 안 가브리엘라 땅요요 봐 심포라 라마균이 메되겐디 그래서니 니 레기 원기 뇽모바다 레다 뇽모 원기 고 깨와 인사 심포라 라마메 되게 자기도 제사 디네자 세 두제 제바체 섬다데 심포라다 dunga tempa seti redo wa seti dus chin samdang gorwa.
Then moving to the second general characteristic, that of suffering. So here the process will be just like we did this morning in relation to the observed objects of feeling, in that they both are consciousness. So the process is the same in that every consciousness has an object. Well, let me express that differently, sorry. So when we come to look at the general characteristic of suffering, as we've done elsewhere, with both the observed object of body and feeling, we look at the causes here that led to the arisal of the observed object. Because it is impermanent, we've already seen that in the first characteristic, which means it comes, first general characteristic, which means it comes from causes. Now, in the second characteristic, that of suffering, we look at in detail what those causes are. Likewise, when we look at the causes then of mind, we will go through the same process as we did before this morning when we looked at feeling, in that they both are consciousness. So feeling, being a consciousness, it has an object. So you could say the cause of feeling is the object. For example, a flower. If consciousness when consciousness apprehends an object, there's always feeling. So therefore, you can say feeling has as its object. Feeling has as its cause an object. Similarly, with mind. Mind always has an object. So you could say, the cause of consciousness, of mind, is its object, such as the flower. So that's not the process of looking for causes that we go through here. Rather, we look at, in the context of mind, the continuity of mind, seeing that this mind there's a continuity of mind, now to previous moments, from this moment right now to previous moments, earlier in the day, previous days, right back throughout this life, into previous lives. So here we're seeing the causes of mind being previous moments. So this is the way we approach in the cause of mind in this meditation, seeing that it comes from this continuity of preceding moments that go back throughout this life, into our previous life, and into lives previous to that. And so what are then the causes of all these minds then? Again, this comes about due to contaminated karma and afflictions. Here we're seeing the similarity in this meditation with the same general characteristic of suffering in relation to the other two observed objects. We come to see that the observed object, in this case mind, has come about in dependence on contaminated karma that was accumulated by afflictions. Therefore, and we come to the same conclusion, therefore, mind is in the nature of suffering. Mind is in the nature of suffering because it has come about in dependence on contaminated karma, and that karma is contaminated because it was accumulated under the influence or the control of afflictions. Therefore, mind also is a true suffering.
Ani diga do tongba sedi dashi rawa ching tu tongba sedi jibarwa da sem sedi kichi jibi rajin za kwa taba ri me do sedi taba marwa gyudan kien la tyoba yinsa ani rawa ri gyudan kien kan shi di wang do song ma da rawa yo ma res dene ani jiga sem de la ya ani kichi nga ma da chi ma da cha che yo ba yinsa cha she la tyo de kichi nga me cha la tyoba chi me cha la tyoba kichi nga ma me de gen she ba che yo ma wa yena kichi nga ma la tyo 다 계지 치마를 고 계지 치마 마저도 계지 치마 지상 계지 아마다 치마를 되비 셰반자 강라 차실라마 되비기 셰바제 민도 매와자 다 귤라마 되베 라와 계지 마지베 따바와 네 차실라마 되비기 아니 지부 되네 지부네 되는 숨 속바 속바데 가야 레민도 속바 주바데 레민도 셈디다 Pasan di Tubame, Simkora Kichi Chiparidua, Simkona Gudan Gyälwa Dubaridua, Simkora Kichi Amada Chimikichi Chashi Dubaridua. Dineza, Dinigi Madube, Sum Sodige Kaya, more to Minusaji. The Chepachi, that the Dasha Ramanji to be Tonga Chepa, Jisi, the Chepachi Korwa.
Then the third general characteristic of mind that we investigate is that it's empty. It's just in the meditation, if you've been familiar with doing them on the other observed objects, it's the same. We see that the mind is empty of being permanent, unitary, and independent. Why is the mind empty of being permanent? Because it changes momentarily. The meaning of permanent is unchanging, doesn't change momentarily. That's not the case with mind. It changes moment by moment. Therefore, it is empty of being permanent. It is also empty of being unitary or single, in that it is dependent on parts. Mind is dependent on parts. What are the parts of mind? Previous moments. In dependence on previous moments comes the present moment, which continues into future moments. So mind has parts, momentary parts. Thirdly, moments of consciousness are its parts. So therefore mind is empty of being unitary or single. Then thirdly, mind is empty of being independent. Here, independent means independent on causes and conditions, whereas mind is dependent on causes and conditions. So therefore, we see that mind is empty of being permanent, unitary and independent, of each of those individually, as well as those three collectively. Rather, mind we know is impermanent. It has parts, it is dependent on parts, and it is dependent on causes.
Adiniki yang Jambati Semna, Zechudo Jambati Semdi Tinche, Semyong, Semni Pazi, Jambetaba Tinje, Denishe, Yang Sherep Yandugi, Jabachi, that is a Gyältsen, Kasora, Kansara, YouTube, Tonga, said, Chisnada, Kansa, said Gudan Kian, Cheshe Kalama to be Kansa, said Miavanza, Denigi Kansa, the long church of Majubares, Semdi, that Denigi. Tene Kansaki launch Majubar, Sherep Chebachi, Kachiachi Wasana, Tambo, Kansa, said Chebachi, Kansa Chebachi, Chisan Kansa Chebachine, Gudan Kien, Cheshe Kalama to be Kansa, Mindu, some big. Then Mevanza, Denigi Kansachi, Gudan Kien Kalama, Ranguni, Truptu Kansaki, Pumpoti, Kasora, Semdi, launch Chemal Peshata, Rim Cheshamare, said Chebacha, that the Kasora Gyältsen. Rangye tu si tu Tonga samdang ta de shigoro. Rangye tu si tu Tonga.
Then moving to the fourth general characteristic, and again the meditation's the same as with the other observed objects. Investigate with wisdom, investigate the person with wisdom, seeing whether the person exists as being self-sufficient, substantially existent. In other words, seeing whether the person exists as being independent from the aggregates, as a controller of the aggregates, as something, the self or the person having control over the aggregates, but independent of them. And we see that the self does not exist in this way. The self is actually dependent on the aggregates. And we come to realize selflessness in this way. And therefore, because the self doesn't exist, or the person, or the self doesn't exist as being self-sufficient, substantially existent, there is no mind that is utilized by a self that is self-sufficient, substantially existent. So again, in this meditation, because it's the same with the previous observed objects, when it investigates the person, seeing that it is not independent of the aggregates, but rather dependent on the aggregates. Therefore, it is not self-sufficient, substantially existent. And as the person is not self-sufficient, substantially existent, there is no such self-sufficient, substantially existent person utilizing the mind. The mind is empty of being utilized by a self-sufficient, substantially existent person, because no such person exists. So this is the same meditation for selflessness as with the previous observed objects.
Dina jidanga zui sem se tile jida sem le ya ri mangbu yo ba jida danga zui sem chasang yi tendo ane ji chingi dunga wa sa da diso ko mya yo ma ro da pen sang yi da chanshu sem pa ba da ane ji ke lame da chon ba diso yi ne sem diso yi sem da diso yi cho wa da ane diso yi phungbo de ye le ya ane 가르 랑게 챙기고 밑에 고미야 봐지. 근데 지생이 밑다고 고미야 요래. 이네 둥하와 세도 고미야 말지 수iten도. 그래서 건도 둥하 말와. 이네 아니 동화 고미야를 다음에 가서 다음에 봐 고미야 용거래. 마도 둥하와데 고미야 용말. 그래서 건도 둥하와 요 말와 한주기다. 매반서 둥하고 고야 매반에. 저다 나랑도 이게 셈데라. 셈랑도 당한도 이게 셈디 자상 고미야 얘기가 제거로 봐.
As mentioned before, there are many types of minds. Here we're talking about a specific mind, that of primary consciousness, but this is found amongst all beings, and one can investigate all primary consciousnesses or main minds through the specific and for general characteristics. However, as mentioned earlier, when you're investigating the mind of particular beings, namely Arya beings, such as Arya Bodhisattvas or Arhats, or Arya Buddhas, then one can investigate the same specific characteristic, but not all four general characteristics, because that of suffering they don't have. Arya Buddhas, the Arya Bodhisattvas, and Arhats have no suffering. So therefore, one cannot investigate their minds for such a characteristic, but one can investigate impermanent, empty, and selfless in relation to the minds of Arya beings.
Da janju semba namgi da denege ji chinye dongba yi da so semgi dendu ani ji chinye dongba yi de gonggo ji dongba yi ji chinye cha de da dang zo gi tumo we gap nyan de da ran ja da janju semba chasang gi tumo wa so komya gi di ka ji chinye de ka sa ran ge tu si chu dong wa se shi ro da janju semba namgi zo karu gonggo ro se ne ani 동반이 공부로 제가 동반이 제가 셈나 민제 셈디 랑긴 나와라 진나요도 그런 거라서네 잠바디게 셈다 미네데네 도시네 다 셈디 랑긴 오 로라야 나요도 가는 난기도 세데 규단게 갈라야 마도 뢰파 샤발야 마도 랑원이 줍데 난거레세 다디 나와나 신디 셈디 두게 민도 제바체도 되네 나 제바체네 셰럽게 제바시네 공배 공명도 뒤에는 지층이 동반이를 공부를.
As we heard this morning in the context of the observed objects of feelings, when bodhisattvas engage in this meditation, they will engage in it in the same way as presented here and go deeper. We're looking at the meditations that are shared or common in that all types of practitioners, whether the Theravada lineage or the Mahayana lineage, they will engage in the meditation on these four characteristics. But when we come later to the uncommon way or the unshared way to meditate, the unique way, then bodhisattvas engage in the meditation on the third general characteristic, in both empty as well, in the way we've heard, as well as emptiness, where they investigate mind as being empty of inherent existence. And this, as we heard, this is the same as we heard this morning in terms of feelings. The mind appears as if it's inherently existent, as if it is not independent on anything at all, but it has its own self-existence. One investigates here to see if it exists in the way that it appears, and we see that it does not exist in the way that it appears. It's empty of existing in the way that it appears. It's empty of existing in a way that's independent of anything at all, but rather it is dependent, in particular, dependence on imputation by mind. So this is the uncommon way that bodhisattvas will meditate on this third general characteristic.
제주 semba 남기 ane komyo diga de tamanya komdu ane chida dele rangi chengi de ngoyo sonda rangi chengi de mi chida kono zoge bene lui yongwa da de jeba mixi jeba chago yo ma ni mane paje chasan kende wa jan yarwa lui yongwa da sim yongwa da ane jiga choyo ngwa de chasan kende ba jan yar chasan denigi ngo de ngoyo chenje jambege ba jin diga dedo mitaba komya da ane dungawa komya ane 동화 komya 다 조 다음에 봐 가사를 다음에 봐 komya 조 가르고 뭐서 조 동반이 디데 동반이 공부를 제가 조 동반이 공부를 그래서네 내가 미비게 동반이 동반이에 관해서 대검제 지상 동반이를 미비게 디수게 된 동반이를 미비게 실라송제도 주고 그러다 실라송도 주고 제가 되네자 동반이를 조 되게 디 동주 최전 다 류다 샘다 아니 초와의 최시 뭐 소리 될래야 미네 디가 돼 동반일 조금 거라다 잠배진 될래 띵해지 신의 주비하다 동반일 미베 신의 줍사와 있나 다 동반이 신의 딩 안에 될래야 잠배 셰럽게 제바치하고 줘야다 동반일 신의 줍사면은 동반일 미네 신의 주비하게 조 셰럽게 봐 진다 잠배게 진지 신의 주비에 조금 거라다 되는 게 지금 난 거로
When bodhisattvas engage in the meditation, the four close placements of mindfulness, whichever of the four observed objects there are, we've covered three already, that of firstly body, then feelings, and our mind, they engage in the meditation as presented here in the common way or the shared way to meditate on the four close placements. However, they will do it whilst engaging in the same meditation technique. They will do it quite differently in that they will go through these, first the specific characteristic of each observed object very quickly because of their great familiarity with the entity of the various observed objects. Moreover, with regard to all four general characteristics, the bodhisattva will meditate on impermanent, suffering, empty and selfless very quickly because of their great familiarity with the topic. Where they'll put the primary energy and time into is in their unique or uncommon way of meditating on the observed object, which is to meditate on how it lacks inherent existence. It's empty of inherent existence, coming to ever deepen their realization of emptiness. So this is where the primary effort and energy of the bodhisattva will be placed, on developing the wisdom realizing emptiness.
그래서네 저기 타라semje 탐지교도 산요고방 토비하게 배주에 능고요 바자 자주 선반하게 semje 탐지 산요고방 토비 추도 냠래 능고로 능고도 지산 될이야 베네 류점바 녀샤 류르미네 잠만녀샤 고묘도 갑라 안지 아주 류지 잠만녀샤 섬다도 그지 제시반의 류디 지게 지천요 고묘 동아에 된바다 됐음다도 아니고 군주 동아에 라시인바 류디 동아에 라시인바 지산 동아에 라시인바디 되니긴사 다디 초와점바녀샤 고묘도 데 동아에 라시 대한 규례다 녀모와 개바레샤스 비게 지산 다디 델레데 딥 방고 디마방다 탑미누스메 셈 잠바녀샤 고묘도 지산 델라 되니기 마탄데 탑마 디규에게 차사 레다 녀모바데니기 지산 레다 녀모게 조데 다세 마릭바디 레샤 덴세 마릭바 레샤 섬제 섬 조체 지산 최 셈잠바녀샤 고묘도 되네 다메바 제 다메바 섬다 지산 되네자 다메 비게다 디 덴진디 녀모바 덴진디 코와게 규녀모바 덴진디 방구도 지산 셈젠 탐제 코와게 규 덴진디 디 방구도 셈베게 조 섬다도 디 방에 님보데 가서네 동반이 또 배셔럽 들어와 지산 동반이 또 배셔럽 진자 디 고묘도 동반이를 미비게 셔럽디 아니 동반이를 미비 동반이들 미비게 신에도 주야다 디 셔럽 주야 디 라동 주야도 조어지 배제된 거로와다 onde 산지 고방 도배시 들어와 지산 산지 고방 도배시 때 라지고 셈전 탐지기 되는 산지 고방 도배시 들어와 지산 셈전 탐지 산지도 가르친 지고로선 코이 동아들에 dunga de la tagu tsambe jeza dunga tado sa de jeza lui damba nyeja kombe ke dunga temba jeza dunga gi namja ti sebo hawa sowa damba nyeja komyo de dunga yu gyu kunjo temba jeza tele temba tagu do sambe ke samlo shukchimbo shuchi gorwa ji yo de ko yedu ma sem damba nyeja ko da 긴 다음에 배 셈을 다진디 간에도 제바지도 공곡된서 토기요 봐도 다 되네 토고디 마든 타면디 가르토스는 동반이 또 람디 냠는jel에 토고다 디야슈 제네 베누바 첨보서고 선배 삼다이도 동반이라 미베 신이에다 사동 토고 선배 배주시고로 난 거로
The way bodhisattvas approach these meditations is really quite special. So if we take as an illustration where they're engaging in the meditation on the close placement of mindfulness on the body, then they'll briefly meditate on its specific characteristic, moving to the general characteristics. But let's just take the illustration of when they're meditating on the general characteristic of suffering. So they have as their goal always, not somewhere in the distant back of their mind, but really at the forefront, they are engaging in this meditation in order to become a Buddha, to alleviate all beings from suffering. So when they come to points such as meditating on the general characteristic of the body, of suffering, they will meditate in the same way as we've heard before, that the body is in the nature of suffering because it arises in dependence on contaminated karma, which is contaminated due to the influence of the afflicted minds, which has as their root the ignorance of self-grasping. So this is the same. All practitioners will meditate in this way. But because of this powerful motivation that is bodhicitta, the bodhisattva then will strive to develop at this very point the wisdom realizing emptiness, because recognizing that it's the ignorance of self-grasping that is keeping all beings bound in samsara. And it's that has to be eliminated in order to gain experience of eliminating it, in order to be able to spiritually develop, to be of ever greater benefit to others. The bodhisattva even here meditates on emptiness, cultivates the wisdom realizing emptiness to counteract the ignorance of self-grasping, which is what ensures beings remain trapped in the suffering realms of samsara.
Sem said, sem la mi, and Dadu Jubazin, Zodi, sem la mi, Zingorwa, Aranzu, sem Chidi, Bene, me, some good do, me, did you do sit and said something, said, Manzo, Manager, semlia, me, sin Dadu Jubazin to go. She said, Dinian, sem said, Dinigi, sem said, you water, having water. Ngo let me be sem di karjius and karju semlia dadu to what's in there. Chisan sem said that they are to get Karis now and Nashi, Majugi da, saying us, similar in the dadu to Batino. Jeda Zimba Nashin, Nezino do, Jebache do, sem di dadu maruba. Chesa Benedici, Majugi, Buddha, Yankala, Cheshakala, Rangun to begin. 다디 롱주자 마임바 레미도 제가 디니기 롱주자 짐바디 다 가르르서 다제 마리 바리샤스 루아다 베네 가사 그랑게 뒤 세수주바 디기 셈디 롱주자 짐바이나 디 짐바디 다 가사 다센세레샤스 제가 디니기 롱주자 진제 델라테네 아네가 저기 뇨모바 되샤 콘도 뇨모바 다마라 기고레 걔네 데레사기도 제가 Yomba Zawa, Yonsagi, Chazan Zawi Shidi Diresha, Chizan Sem, Denigi, Kansa Range to be Situpati, Long Church Zimbi Zimbadi, that Dasin Reshas. Chizan Denigi Zimba Nashin to do a Midus Chebachedu, Chizan Chebachedu, Denigi, and Datu Tibati Yomar. Chizan Sim said, all around the Hasam done the Simdi, Da Reyomar, since Mayanza, Da said. Now, I said, Daddy, say when the semi-ten year, your medicine, Dame Baton, Dame Baton, you do. She's not Dame Baton, Dame Baton, Dado Jubatim, Zimbadi, the Loche, deep on two good do's, deep on be pumpa, go things do, simply how go Tonyon gore. That Tonyon do, then some Jamania Compege, Gortelin, Gortingi, Namshat, how to gore. Says on Gortin Namja, Dame Pumpi, Dado Jubatim, Pumpi, Pumpa, do, deep on. nyomba sabona je pandu pantu de pambe pambadu se 하고 해도 고대 하고 두고로 제산다 고대 하고 두유도 니 토베기 다 탑람 가르두스데 다 다음에 버터 로다 셰디 로안 짐바도 추춤라서 고메 람냠네 제야데 하고 두고로 제산디 람냠네 제야라 엄베스 치거리세지 제산 셈잠바니자 곰베게 다음에 받아 하고 그래서 가서 고대 여봐 하고 두고래 제산 덴바시 나네 맞아 고대 남샤 하고 두고래 제래 그게 무슨 진짜 셈용어 세디 셈크롱 다도 주버 준비 다도 주버 시 제기도 삼다로 와다 시다 다도 주버 준비 시가데 치우슨 아 저기 셈사 다 세링아 조 셈이야 진득게 마 지생이 검는 마다 랑의 생도 셈 오르와 다 지생이 시르는 아도 리거와 제산 다 세디 셰여도 제산 아도 지생에 다음에 벤 남자 셰여 검는 셰도 지생 리거와
And the Bodhisattva then is engaging in this meditation, reflecting on the general characteristics of mind. Then, because of their strong determination to become a Buddha for the sake of others, they will be investigating then the mind in great detail, seeing how it is onto mind that as ordinary beings we grasp at so and often identify with this as our self-identity, confusing it's confusing this impermanent mind that's in the nature of suffering and is empty and selfless, confusing this, thinking that it is truly existent, and grasping at this as with our identifying this, the mind, as being ourself. That's clearer. We mistakenly identify with the mind as being the self. Here the Bodhisattva investigates the mind, seeing how it appears, as if it is something that's independent, as if it's something that is under its own control, if it's something that is self-existent, seeing it doesn't exist in this way at all. It is empty of self-existence or true existence or inherent existence. And thereby realizing it doesn't exist in the way that it appears at all. And therefore, the self is not truly existent. And as the self is not truly existent, there's no truly existent self that utilizes a mind, because no truly existent self exists. Here then, the Bodhisattva comes to understand that this ignorance, that is at the root of all our suffering, is a wrong consciousness. And being a wrong consciousness, it can be eradicated completely. And thereby, recognizing that the root cause of all our afflictions can be eradicated, as well as all their seeds, true cessations are understood. The realization comes to the Bodhisattva that true cessations can be achieved because the root of all our suffering is a wrong consciousness that believes that something that doesn't exist to exist. Through eradicating that, freedom will be achieved. True cessation, freedom will be achieved. So this is how the meditation on the close placement of mindfulness leads one to realize true cessations.
Ona dandala dimba de diso ane lu jamba nyeja da chowa jamba nyeja sem jamba nyeja chue jamba nyeja si le tang zugi lu jamba nyeja de komyo de an de la lu la rang ge ching ye da ji ching ni da na komba ji yu komyo de ga sne an de dunga de be nam sha de zo de ha go tu ko dimba shi de dunga de be nam sha la ha go kom go je ba je da dili go des 하고 두 그래제 진짜 동아된 발로 주고 그래서 동아된 냠는 제야를 차고 그래제 나 초와점만이 자디 공묘도 갑라 안디나 저 초와디마 지게 초와 될라 되네 초와디 안 되샤던 콘라서 녀모바 기비 시체 될라 되네 레사 레델라 되네 아는 아주 코알이 겨울링교바 하고도 동안 군주대바 동안 유주 군주대바랴 대바신 군주대바 란냠레라 주고래제래 당아주 셈라미제 안 대만예샤 고묘도 다랑게 생이 지생이 다녀 고묘도 제가 셈디 temba dadu chupa tsimbi shi tso sem dadu marubi teni cheba chi kumbyodu ane nga zu kuktendi sem la nawa na shi rangi ngoni chupa temba chupa dadu chupa nawa na shi mindu sembi ki hago tukuri te hago du ane de pangpi kukten yupa hago ko temba shi na ne ane kukten la ane nyamsu limba la chuko reche da chwe temba siya di ki shi yandu da di teni ki nyomo pangya ka tablam ane nyomo rikti nyomo bardi ane lam ri namjange cho lam gewe cho rese pa yawa cheche di komyo de ane lam yi denpa la ane jugo re cheza da tenpa nyesha shi komya di ki tenpa shi langdura nyamne che la jugo re se di shi goro sung goro wa chwe tenpa nyesha cheza chwe tenpa nyesha labyo de dina nyomo rikti ne tu di lam yi rikti ne tu yawa che ne da di komgoya di panggoya di rsa di danga zu komne komya di resha si yawa che de pangja de di panggoya di sha komyo di wo sha si yawa kyabar che shingyo de ko lam di ki bala nyamne che bala jugo re che chisa di tenpa shi nyamne che di kaso re tenpa nyesha shi nyamne che shu de tenpa shi nyamne lo juya di jugo re che
I want to summarize then the relationship between the Four Noble Truths and these four close placements of mindfulness. The first observed object is the body. And we know the way to meditate on this is first on it with its specific characteristic or by its specific characteristic, and then the four general characteristics. And thereby one comes to realize true sufferings, that this body is the basis upon which all suffering is experienced. As long as we have this form aggregate, we will suffer. Thereafter, we meditate on the close placement of mindfulness on feelings, investigating through first the specific and then the general characteristics, coming to realize the role feelings play in us remaining bound in the suffering realms of samsara, that through constantly craving and grasping at pleasant feelings, as well as trying to repulse unpleasant feelings, we continue to accumulate causes that keep us bound in samsara. In this way, we come to realize true origins. And as we've just been looking at now, through reflecting on the close placement of mindfulness on the mind, and investigating it through first the specific and then the four general characteristics, we come to see that the mind, too, doesn't exist in the way that it appears, but is empty of inherent existence. Its nature thereby its nature can be, its nature is free from afflictions and their seeds. And thereby we come to realize true cessations. We come to realize that freedom is possible. And moreover, we come to realize that any sense of self-identity we have, or identifying with the mind as the self, this is mistaken, and therefore freedom is possible. So this is how true cessations come to be realized through meditating the close placement of mindfulness on the mind. And then the fourth observed object, that of phenomena, here through meditating on the close placement of mindfulness on phenomena, investigating it through first the specific and then the general characteristics, one comes to realize what are the phenomena that are to be cultivated and which are those to be abandoned. And in this way, one comes to realize the fourth noble truth, that of true paths.
lui di khasan sheba na shin ne jungwa shi da su ti ro ya cha la so ba shi ge chop ngon drup de ge su ru wa chin da nga su de ne she do wa sem be ge che ba che da sam ta de ne ge da di na she Sudi Semdavena, Denigi Sudida, then Dini Sudpa, Jembe Tata, Sim Shanla Gaya Mayawache, Su Corona, Su Corona, sometimes Sem Jambadi, Pa Zinje, Zindu Gabla, the Sherepki Chevache, the Sudi. 다 간데스 책도 고기지기지 지바리 그디바리 니기도 스비 교와타도 나저 녀마게 다도 전에 하 유어 주고 받아 충분히야 체체체도 한 가점 질려 수디 백커로 매와 차르고 봐 제가 진이 인자 수디 파 유어데 따와 템부레 민도와 제가 수디 유어 주도와 선배기 도 제제바 진행하는 수기 되도 미다바 삼다다지 그러와 다디 삼다도 간저 가르 디 삼다는 가르용 고래에서도 다 제가 당아도 신의 삼다 디네 당아도 제가 아주 류디 예비 된데라 당아저 가르쳐 보라시네 게베 자와 강투도 주마도 다다 예디가 대부 예디가블라 dum마도 수디 기지기지 유루도 제가 유루나 그 지금 닝바 차다 변델야 내 나서 망볼래야다 디네 강아 tre바나 아주 게베 자와 주투야 민도 제가 디네 주투야 민도와 디네 자다다 탕보데 대보에도 저기 기회 자우주야디 빼면서 계침버리샤 선배게 삼다야디 니차고로 받아 저기 종아서 다데 다음에 받아 다셔랑 주가 세팅한 저기 삼다야 되스칼레 가고로 받 당아서 기회 최초대 가르스네 소수 수디 중위게 라신 바디 삼다 데게지기지 집이 미다바지 삼다 데니 미다바 삼다자 당아서 다데 마치바 유비 갑텔라 가르지나 비시다 유디바 인자 디라 게주tum나 주투게 강도 주고도 선배심식이야 지기와 당 아주 초와라 삼다베나 다 초와된 아주 초와데 가브리엘라 초와 대와용도 동아 당이 초와데 가니스토시티 지상 초와세디 데니기 뇽용어 디둑 땅용가 뇽용어 지레샤 선배 초와데 삼다 다당은 som다이는 초와디야 다 가브리엘네 대와레 가브리엘네 동아 가브리엘나 땅용고 유어도는 끼지기지 유어도 되겠지 땡부메 되겠지 레샤 데네 엔자다 안주 초와들네 갈리기도 세네 초와 대와레디 차바게 다 차바디 원기 아니 갈리기도 세네 저게 베네 차바게도 베는 하나 뒤로 받으면 소소기 지게 담년달라 차바이나다 차바게와 소 담년달기 미템 담년다시도 소소 대랑라 중으로 데니기 대와라 차네 담년다기 되바 되냐기 되발라 차바게야 데니기 한지 규제라라 베네 벤졸이야 소소게 벤졸나 직기우 중거서 베 대화 중거서 베니 대화라 차제 규 벤졸라에게 탑시지도 소소게 탑실다 탑실이야 다마라 용으로와 차네 차바게 탑시제야라 마모 용을 제상 가시기 전화를 쳐야다 고모구야다 생이 투제다야다 딘체도 아니디 디빌레가 차르고 제가 데니게 제발에 데네 소수기 대화라 차제 한시안이야 제야제야다 데니게 차도 니 원게다 랭아바사 니 랭아바사네 델라테네 안나 저기 직 대시 류동아이 풍부 용고야디 랭과디네 차도와 선배섬다야다 데니게 초와 동아지들라 미디어바게제 소소 동아지 초와 동아게나 디 구고 말 뭐지 현다지게 공할래 녀바체나 나라 초와 동아기를 삼제 소소 초와 동아들이 미디어바게제 파줘야디 소소는 녀사라스면 되니 파줘야 녀바제야다 니 무슨 라소바 있나 되니 여바는 남서 써야다 디지구로 와다가죠 가슴 무슨 여바나 나래 녀제 초와 동아기를 삼제 세상 동아들 미고 완자 동아들 자두게 차바게디 디기녀사람 도와치는 현대 차상 써야다. 디네 제여도 아니 량아 봐서 코를 기도와 제자 디네 장 소소 소화계디 델라디네 차바게야던 콘로게야다 녀모게 차상 디네 규칙이도 디 녀모바 델라디네 코르게 동아 기도 제자 디네 장 당한 소화 대도 땅님 가능게나 차바세당 콘로스데 기마게 탑지체고도 디 마진 디케반의 량아바사도 제가 디네자 델야 녀모바마기야 탑시고도 제가 녀모바 빠야라 당아저 가르지오스네 게위 초 베지다데 고미야데 게치모리에 사데 당아저 게주르비에 게치모리에 선배게 삼다데 다 강토도 제데 가소리 고미야데 아저 게치제 디차고로 와다
There's a lot in these practices that you can meditate on. I want to pull out those key points that I'd encourage you to spend time on, because there are aspects of the meditation which are quite difficult. There are other aspects which are incredibly useful right now. So I'd encourage you to meditate on the close placement of mindfulness on the body, utilizing the mental factors of mindfulness to keep one on the object, not distracted, and then wisdom to investigate. Investigating first the entity of the objects, of the body, seeing that it comprises of what the body comprises of, in brief, as we see in the definition, the elements and the composites of the elements. Thereafter engage in the general characteristics, the meditation on the general characteristics. And here I'd encourage you to focus really just on the first two, because these are approachable and of great benefit for us. So first, on impermanent, that the body changes momentarily. This is a key meditation, to recognize the change that we've already experienced in this life. This isn't difficult, but we need to remember this. So we utilize mindfulness here. We investigate to really deepen our understanding that this body changes momentarily. Every moment it declines further. And we need to come to the point to realize here the body is not stable, it will not last, and it's not reliable. However, it does serve a tremendous purpose, that in dependence on this body we can accumulate a lot of virtue. And the purpose here of this reflection is to encourage us to utilize well what remains of this opportunity, to use our wisdom and to recognize that our situation is changing. It's not that it may change, it's not that it will change, it is changing. And it is changing in the direction of decline. Therefore, we must utilize what remains of the situation of this life well before our situation worsens, because at any time the situation can worsen, and it can become an this opportunity that we've achieved can be lost. So therefore, we need to utilize well what remains of this life. This is important. So this is how to meditate on this general characteristic in a way that can bring great transformation. And similarly then, with feelings, meditate on the entity of feeling, recognizing that feeling as this entity of experience, reminding ourselves that every thought we have, every consciousness, has this entity of feeling, has this mind of feeling, so therefore it is of great importance to us, because it accompanies every thought and influences us thereby. And moving to the general characteristics of feeling, here again reflect on that it is impermanent. It's not stable. Feelings are not stable. They are not reliable. And this is important for us to recognize, because of the way that when pleasant feelings arise, we grasp at them. We so want them. We desire them so. And thereby, we engage in all the variety of activities we have in our worldly life, to experience mere fleeting moments of pleasant feelings. Feelings that have no real value in themselves. And yet, so much of our energy in the day, not just physical energy, but our verbal energy and our way of thinking, is directed at experiencing fleeting moments of pleasure. And this consumes our time. We watch our thoughts. We see where our thoughts are going, consuming our time and our energy. Likewise, with unpleasant feelings, as soon as they arise, we get annoyed. And as soon as the unpleasant feelings arise, we often are directed towards repulsing someone or something, a being or an event. We just watch at our reaction to a tiny insect. Immediately an unpleasant feeling arises, repulsing us from this being, perhaps even leading to us wanting harm to come to it, even wanting to harm it ourselves. So we need to be aware of our minds, utilize mindfulness and wisdom here at all times, watching for the role that feelings play, being aware that feelings pose a grave danger, either directing us towards attachment or towards anger, and leading to us creating in every moment further causes that keep us bound. So we need to remind ourselves that feelings are impermanent. They're not worthy of grasping at as if they have some intrinsic value when they last a mere moment. Moreover, they are in the nature of suffering. In fact, they are origins of our suffering. So thereby, we need to be on guard, not grasping at them, not giving them more value than they hold.
Anzu dine samdadi semlia chik namdo ro da mangbura chik kangal mangbo samdaya da dine chik liaga do da kangal do da dine ge samla mangbo khoche dine gi chik samla lü chamba lü lia cheba cha da mitaba samdadi mo chik soal samdane da manyesha komyalia chik komatu yungruwa dine nyelanga joge dine yoba ne nyele and 지금 아주 류를 소화를 미바이나 소소 이 가지고 민 미니 지게 지원이야 직접만이 자고 나디 시고로 어디 나신지네 소화랑 삼다제 생각야 마삼바세 한 소화세디 되니 용용고 용어치리 했으면 대랑 잠바 땡제 잠바디랑 지 셰삼이가 마타바제 대랑 진지는 샘디 슈당하다 세부제네 아니 미바 delya anchik chowa khoronlia nyoyo ngodi terang samda sebu ta tuyagi du chen dyobaina ani gazam jilya chike jemba da namdo mangudma hiru kurwada dene gi shiden ne lele chason de dene shine da sem ngo delya an chowa delya da kichi jesan chowa se delya chakwa게 가야 말하선 chowa se di kichi jibi gyuar mato ko takwa timbuneyo marchna gyurugudu wa dejinye soate da denishe deni gyurugudu wa sembe da soase kijiki jibe ranshin chiredu wa sembe samdadi denige samdai wa da jisan jibe ranshin chi inza ko soade la jetnga soade dewar chen shiu de la chahoya ka mido ga ka dewan namsa gyurene endunga keredu gyurja dunga kereya 그런 게 지기 지루 답을 띵부가 민도가 될이야 이 문제 배쇼 담진제가 민도 선배선다로 하다 되네게 섬 차고게 방야라 가야라 되네 톱시야 지차야래다 되네 섬다야래 당을 지기 담만야셔게 뜻이바디 아 주게 섬다다데 되네 내가 되네 섬다이로 되네 섬당이 땡해지는 로디 파 챙기지는 되네 아주 검시 체르체르도 아직 야야야 검토야 제기로 와되고 자기로 와
In our sessions together, you've seen many ways to engage in many different meditations to engage in, going to various levels of profundity. But what I'd like to leave you with and encourage you to engage in is in terms of the meditation relating to the body. This is important to bring us to the conclusion this opportunity we have will not last. And it's likely to get more difficult for us. Our potential to practice is likely, our potential to transform ourselves may well get more difficult. In particular, with impermanence, we may encounter illness or some other severe difficulty, which will serve to greatly impede our spiritual development. Therefore, recognizing the impermanence of this body, utilize what remains of this life well. And the second meditation I'd encourage you to put energy into is that to observe the role feelings play. Do this in meditation and continue it between meditation sessions. The mental factor of feeling accompanies each and every mind. Watch how feelings arise and watch the role that they play, coming to get to know yourself well in this way. Seeing how every thought that comes, there's a feeling associated with it. And it's often a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling, sometimes a neutral feeling. And then watch what happens. If there's a pleasant feeling, watch for that arisal of attachment, for longing to encounter that object again, longing to have that experience again, desiring to meet it again. If it's an unpleasant feeling, hoping not to meet it again, being repelled from that person or that event. And seeing the role then that feelings play, pleasant and unpleasant feelings in particular play in your life. And see how fleeting they are, that they come and they go. And not only how fleeting they are, but actually beyond the power that we give them. On their own, they have no power. They arise and they pass. They only the strength of suffering that they cause us, suffering through the arisal of attachment or the arisal of aversion, the strength of that, we give it. So learn to let go. Learn to observe and learn to let go. Coming to see that feelings arise, and that's fine. Every thought is accompanied by a feeling. It can arise, but it doesn't have to be grasped at. It doesn't have to be given more validity than it's worth. Just see it as the arisal of a feeling that will pass. Recognize that by grasping at this pleasant feeling, wanting it again, is what gives it its energy and its life. Let it go. Likewise, when the unpleasant feeling arises, it's our grasping at it that really causes the pain. Let it go. In this way, we stopped grasping at these feelings and mixing them with our mistaken sense of identity, longing for ever more pleasure to overcome all displeasure. Rather, let it go. And I encourage you to do this in your meditation. Get to know yourself well, and between your sessions, be aware of your mind. And if you put these two together, the meditation on the body and the meditation on feelings, it will transform your life. Because meditating on the impermanence of your body will lead you to use your life well. Leading you to wanting to utilize your life well will mean that the meditation on feelings, you'll utilize this also between sessions. Seeing when a pleasant feeling arises, be aware of the danger of attachment and aware of the danger of grasping at this feeling. Likewise, when an unpleasant feeling arises, be aware that from grasping at this, then further anger or aversion will arise. So this is how, by meditating on the body, giving rise to the strong wish to utilize this life well before it declines and ends, will lead us to wanting to but also meditating well on feelings will ensure that we guard ourselves from wasting a life chasing worldly pleasures that have no essence, and rather focus our energy on something much more worthwhile. So this is how I encourage you to meditate meditate every day and utilize these meditations in your daily life. And by doing so repeatedly over a sustained period, for sure, transformation will come. So thank you, then we'll conclude here, and next time we'll come to the fourth of the observed objects, the close placement of mindfulness on phenomena, and the way to perform that meditation. So thank you very much.